If your last name is Irish and you have dark hair, dark eyes, or skin that tans instead of burns, someone in your family has probably told you the same old story. Spanish sailors, shipwrecked survivors, a secret bloodline hiding inside an ordinary Irish name. But the real explanation is older, stranger, and far more powerful than shipwrecked sailors. Some of these surnames carry the memory of Viking invasions, forgotten kingdoms, and one dynasty that changed Ireland forever. By the end of this list, you will understand why the final surname is the most explosive name in this entire video. Number 10. Doyle. Say that name out loud and it sounds gentle, almost soft. But the older form, O'Doul, was never a compliment. It means descendant of the dark foreigner. In medieval Ireland, invading Norwegians were called the fair foreigners, and invading Danes were called the dark foreigners. Doyle was born as a label for the men who came off the longships and never fully left. The older records place these families around Dublin and the eastern coastline, where Norse settlers intermarried with Irish clans for generations, until the bloodlines blurred beyond separation. Within a few generations, the dark foreigner was ruling ports and marrying into Gaelic nobility. Old church and land records describe these families minting coins, running shipyards, and negotiating with Gaelic kings as equals rather than enemies, within only a few generations of first arriving on the coast as raiders. Later, when Norman forces arrived in the 12th century, many Doyle families were already so embedded in Irish life that they fought on the Gaelic side against the new invaders. A strange reversal for a name born from invasion itself. If this is your surname, the old annals suggest your family may descend from the very raiders Irish poets once feared, absorbed so completely that the invader became indistinguishable from the invaded. But Doyle is not the darkest name on this list. The next one wears its meaning even closer to the skin. Number 9. Dunn. The Irish form is O'Doin, and it translates almost too perfectly for a list built around this exact legend. It means descendant of the Dark One, a name likely describing brown or black hair rather than the fair complexions typically associated with Norse or Anglo settlers. This was not a Viking label imposed from outside. It was a native Gaelic description, worn proudly by a ruling family. The lords of a small kingdom in what is now County Louth, recorded repeatedly in land charters and local annals, defending their territory against neighboring dynasties for centuries. These lords were not minor figures. They controlled a strategically important stretch of borderland and appear in genealogies alongside other regional ruling families, taxed, courted, and occasionally attacked by larger kingdoms that wanted their ground. The twist is that Dunn is one of the only names on this entire list where the dark and black Irish is not folklore, metaphor, or later legend layered on top of a name. It is the literal, documented meaning of the surname itself. If this is your surname, the old records suggest the legend did not attach itself to your family by accident. But not every name on this list earned its power through complexion. The next one earned it through sacred ground. Number 8. Cullen. The surname looks plain, the kind of name you would forget seconds after hearing it. But its older form, O'Quillan, ties directly to the holly tree, considered sacred and protective in early Irish tradition, tied to land boundaries and sanctuary, in a landscape without fences or centralized courts. A boundary marked by holly meant something enforceable in a world without modern surveying or centralized courts. Something a rival clan respected or violated at real cost to itself. Families carrying this name appear in charters across Munster and Leinster, often controlling territory rather than a single royal court. When English colonial administrators later mapped and confiscated Irish land, boundary families like the Cullens were frequently targeted first, precisely because their ground had long been marked as significant. The name survived exile and redistribution, reappearing generation after generation in parish and tax records, and later among emigrants across Britain and North America. If this is your surname, your family's power was never loud. It was rooted, literally, in ground the rest of Ireland depended on. But the next name survived through blood, and its meaning is more violent than it sounds. Number 7. Flynn. The Irish form, O'Floin, descends from flan, meaning red or ruddy, most likely describing a warrior's complexion or reputation, rather than gentle features. Old annals record several unrelated Flynn lineages ruling small kingdoms across Roscommon, Antrim, and Cork, each shaped by its own regional warfare rather than one royal court, and each apparently unconnected to the others despite sharing the exact same name and origin story. By the time English administrators began recording Irish names in colonial documents, these separate bloodlines had already blurred into a single surname without anyone noticing or objecting. Two people named Flynn today may share nothing more than a description that once applied to entirely different warriors in entirely different centuries. If this is your surname, your family's story is not one legend. It is several, converging under one modern spelling, but the next name did not begin as Irish at all. Number 6. Walsh. Its Irish form, Brethnoch, means simply the Welshman or the foreigner. When Norman lords invaded Ireland in the 12th century, they brought Welsh soldiers and archers with them, and those soldiers eventually settled permanently, keeping a surname that literally announced where they had come from. Walsh became and remains one of the most common surnames in all of Ireland, a foreign label so thoroughly absorbed into Irish identity that most bearers today have no idea their name once meant outsider rather than native. Old muster rolls and land grants trace early Walsh families across Mayo, Kilkenny, and Wexford, holding territory granted for military service to the Norman crown, then gradually adopting Irish language, marriage customs, and local loyalties over successive generations until the foreign origin was buried completely under centuries of ordinary Irish life. If this is your surname, the old records suggest your family arrived as conquerors and stayed as natives. But the next family arrived the same way and rose even higher. Number 5. Cusack. Descended from the Norman house of de Cusack, this family crossed from Normandy into Ireland in the wake of the 12th century invasion and was granted land across County Meath, appearing repeatedly in charters, court rolls, and later in Irish parliamentary records for generations afterward. Unlike many Norman families who kept themselves deliberately separate from native Irish society, the Cusacks intermarried into Gaelic families within a few generations, adopting local language, dress, and customs so completely that English administrators later labeled such families degenerate, a formal legal term meaning too Irish for the crown's comfort. That label was meant as an insult, a warning to other settler families not to follow the same path. Historically, it marks exactly the families that absorbed Irish identity most completely, and the Cusacks wore that supposed insult for centuries without disappearing. If this is your surname, the old rolls suggest your ancestors chose Ireland over the crown that sent them. But the next Norman name climbed even further, into the port cities themselves. Number 4. Power. From the Norman name Lepore, this family arrived with the invasion and was granted extensive territory across Waterford, one of Ireland's most important trading ports, and a direct gateway to Iberian and continental shipping routes. Old charters and church registers place Power families controlling land, tolls, and coastal defense across generations, intermarrying with both Norman and Gaelic nobility until the bloodline was inseparable from either side, and appearing consistently in local records long after most Norman settler families had faded from prominence. Waterford's trade routes ran deep into Spain and France, and merchant families with names like Power appear repeatedly in shipping and customs records tied to that traffic, standing at the exact point where foreign goods, foreign sailors, and foreign blood regularly entered Ireland. If this is your surname, the old charters place your family exactly where foreign ships and Irish soil actually met, generation after generation, long before any single shipwreck could explain it. But one name on this list controlled that meeting point even more directly than Power ever did. Number 3. Lynch. The Lynch family were one of the 14 tribes of Galway, merchants so powerful, the city itself was sometimes called the City of the Tribes. Old records show Lynch families controlling ships, trade routes, and city government for generation after generation, with direct commercial and marriage ties running into Spain and the Iberian coastline long before any Armada wreck ever reached Irish shores. Galway's tribal families deliberately restricted marriage and business with surrounding Gaelic clans for generations, effectively building a closed merchant aristocracy inside the city walls, which meant Iberian, French, and English trading blood mixed more easily into these families than native Irish blood did, a detail rarely mentioned in the popular version of this legend. This is where the Black Irish legend and documented history actually intersect. One unverified local legend claims a Lynch mayor of Galway once condemned his own son to execution for murder, and some historians argue this is where the English phrase lynch law originated, though scholars still debate the story's accuracy. If this is your surname, the port records suggest your ancestors were not passengers in history, they set the terms of trade. But the next name did not just trade with foreign powers, it became one. Number 2. Fitzgerald. Few Irish surnames carry more raw historical weight. Descended from Norman Lord Maurice Fitzgerald, this family became the Geraldines, rising to become Earls of Kildare and Earls of Desmond, at times ruling more territory and commanding more loyalty across Ireland than the English crown itself could claim. Royal correspondence, land charters, and rebellion records trace this dynasty across nearly 5 centuries of Irish political life, so completely absorbed into Gaelic culture, language, and custom that English officials eventually coined a phrase to describe them, more Irish than the Irish themselves, a line still quoted by historians today when describing how thoroughly a conquering family can be conquered in return. That phrase was meant as a warning to the crown, not a compliment. It described a Norman dynasty so thoroughly Irish that London could no longer fully trust it to serve English interests, a family that had switched sides simply by staying in one place long enough. If this is your surname, the old charters suggest your family did not just settle in Ireland. For a time, entire parts of Ireland answered to your family instead of the king in London. But even Fitzgerald is not the final name. The last surname on this list did not just gain power inside Ireland, it reshaped the entire island's future. Number 1. Kavanagh. The Irish form, Comhanach, was the name of the ruling house descended from the kings of Leinster, one of the best documented royal genealogies in medieval Ireland, traced directly to Diarmait mac Murchada, king of Leinster. When rivalry among Irish kings drove Diarmait from his throne, he did something no Irish ruler had done before. He crossed the sea and asked Norman lords in England for military help to reclaim his kingdom. That single decision opened the door to the Norman invasion of Ireland, a moment so consequential that Irish history is often divided into before and after it. His descendants kept the surname, later anglicized to Kavanagh, and unlike almost every other native Gaelic dynasty, they did not collapse afterward. While rival kingdoms fractured or were absorbed into Norman lordships within a generation, the Kavanaghs intermarried with the new Norman aristocracy and held real political and military power in Leinster for hundreds of years, appearing again and again in royal correspondence, land disputes, and rebellion records well into the later medieval period. Some branches were formally recognized by English crown officials as kings of Leinster as late as the 15th century, an almost unheard-of survival for a native Irish royal line under sustained colonial pressure, long after nearly every other Gaelic dynasty had lost its titles entirely. The Black Irish legend usually points toward foreign sailors arriving in Ireland by accident. Kavanagh is the opposite. It is a native royal bloodline that reached outward deliberately, pulled a foreign power into Ireland, and then survived the very transformation it had triggered. If this is your surname, the old genealogies suggest your family did not simply live through Irish history. It helped decide how the rest of this list would even exist, and historians still debate whether Diarmait mac Murchada should be remembered as a traitor or a desperate king with no remaining options. That is the truth hiding behind names people say every single day, on classroom attendance sheets, on wedding invitations, on gravestones in small parish cemeteries. A surname is never just a label, it is a compressed history, folded into a handful of letters, carrying Viking raids, native description, sacred land, warrior kingdoms, Norman conquest, Iberian trade, and one royal decision that reshaped a nation. Doyle carried invasion, absorbed into identity, a raider's label that quietly became a defender's name. Dunn carried the literal meaning the legend was named for, dark hair and dark eyes written directly into a surname long before anyone imagined shipwrecked sailors. Cullen carried land itself, sanctuary and boundary compressed into a name rather than a title. Flynn carried scattered warrior kings, one description worn by unrelated bloodlines until history flattened them together. Walsh and Cusack and Power carried conquest that slowly, generation by generation, became belonging rather than occupation. Lynch carried the real trade routes behind the myth, the actual ships and marriages that later became folklore. Fitzgerald carried a dynasty so powerful the crown feared losing Ireland to its own settlers. And Kavanagh carried the decision that started this entire chain of events, a native king who reached for foreign help and changed the shape of a nation. None of this means every bearer of these names descends directly from kings, raiders, or rebels, and no honest historian would ever claim otherwise. But it does mean these names are real fossils of a history most people never learn in school, hiding in plain sight on passports, mailboxes, and family Bibles. The so-called Black Irish story that most people repeat is almost never about shipwrecked Spanish sailors at all. It is about centuries of invasion, trade, land, and dynasty, compressed so tightly into a handful of letters that nobody stops to notice anymore. So tell me in the comments which surname was yours, and what old family story you were told about where it came from. Tell me your family's region, your clan, your migration story, or the country your name traveled through before it reached you. If you want another forgotten bloodline decoded next, name it below, because somewhere out there, another ordinary surname is quietly waiting to reveal the kingdom it came from.